Welcome to This Week in Heresy, episode 48, Inclusive Wicca, with our guest via Skype, Yvonne Aburrow. Hi, Yvonne. Welcome to This Week in Heresy.
Thank you.
So, for the people that don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Okay. My name is Yvonne Aburrow, and I've been a pagan since 1985 and a Wiccan since 1991 when I was initiated into gardeneering craft. I'm bisexual. I think I sort of came out really gradually as bisexual because it was kind of, I came out to close friends, and then I came out to eventually came out to co-workers and family and things like that. And it's kind of hard to be out as a bisexual when you're actually dating a member of the opposite sex. Mm-hmm. So, because people just don't get the whole, you can be a bisexual but still be dating someone of the opposite sex or indeed the same sex. Because apparently this does not compute. So in my in my day job, I work as a web developer. And I've also been writing poetry for many years. I've got a few poetry anthologies out. And I wrote my first pagan book in, let's see, what would that have been? 1992, I think. Yeah. And very excited about that. I now have 8 books out. 4 of them are on sort of folklore and mythology, and my most recent book is All Acts of Love and Pleasure, Inclusive Wicca, which is it's mainly about including LGBT people in Wicca, but it's also about including other potentially marginalised groups. And I now feel that I didn't go into enough detail about those other marginalised groups, because I kind of thought, well, there's nothing in Wicca that structurally excludes Black people or disabled people, and now I realise that although they're not structurally excluded from it, they are excluded because Wiccans are only human and behave like the rest of mainstream society and go around excluding people that we really shouldn't. So, maybe one day there'll be another edition with those aspects in as well.
Yeah, that's actually why I contacted you to do an interview, because, I have to admit that, I haven't had time to read the book after finding out about it because it got posted on the Wild Hunt. A review of it got posted on the Wild Hunt.
Yeah, I was very excited about that review.
It was really great. But, as my coven, Circle of Caradon, really is trying to make inclusive Wicca. We've been trying to do that. So it was interesting to see this book. I was like, oh, I have to interview her and find out her take on this. And so, what is your take on it? Why do you think it's been exclusive, and do you think it's getting better?
I think it's been exclusive because there was a lot of focus on heterocentric symbolism and ritual. People talk about the god and the goddess, and they tend to see the god and the goddess as being a heterosexual couple doing heterosexual things. And whilst doing heterosexual things can be fun, it's not the only form of sexuality. And if we focus exclusively on the god and the goddess doing things, then it becomes exclusive by its very nature. And you don't need to do a massive tweak. You don't really need to do a massive tweak to the symbolism to make it work and be inclusive. And one of the things that drives me absolutely crazy is people who assume that polarity can be only be generated by a person with a male body, or assigned male at birth, and a person with a female body, or assigned female at birth. And then you go, well, what about the intersex people, and what about the transgender people, and what about the people who just don't, if the energy that's being generated has an erotic component to it, then what about the people who aren't attracted to the opposite sex? And so I did a talk on this at Witch Fest in November, and we got a whole bunch of people together, most of whom were LGBT, I think. And we generated some polarity by using the fact that invited a lot of people to come to the front and generate some energy. And so I got all the air and fire signs to stand on one side of the room and make energy together, and all the water and earth signs to stand on the other side and make energy together, and then bring those different energies together. And I swear the room, this was in November, right? So the room was quite cold when we started. And by the time we finished, the room had warmed up and the atmosphere had changed. And because it was at the end of the day, everybody was feeling quite tired. And suddenly the energy just picked up in the room. And it was just, suddenly it was all bubbly and nice and warm and cozy and fuzzy, which proves unequivocally that you can make polarity with other things than a male-bodied person and a female-bodied person. And so that is the whole thing of making people stand boy, girl in circle drives me up the wall. Cakes and wine is another obvious one. Any two people can do cakes and wine. And the way I picked up a really nice way of saying the wording from some people in Europe, and they came up with as the cup is to the beloved, so the athame is to the lover. So that it only works in English, as my friends from Germany and Spain have pointed out, because the nouns are still gendered, so you're like stuffed. But it really works well in English anyway. And so that's cakes and wine sorted out, and also the idea of doing it with two cups for a lesbian pair of witches. So the temperance card and the tarot. So you pour one cup into the other cup.
Well, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, it works really nicely actually. Then the other thing is invocation, where quite often you get people saying, "Oh, you must have a man invoking a goddess onto a woman and a woman invoking a god onto a man." Well, why? You can have same-sex invocation. You can have a deity of a different gender invoked, or a deity of no gender, or a deity with multiple genders, or and of not forgetting all those wonderful queer deities out there who are just waiting for us to call them. I must put in a plug for the marvelous book. What's it called? Castle's Encyclopedia of Queer Myth, Symbol and Spirit.
I have that one too.
It is awesome, yeah. It's also where I got the cover picture for All Acts of Love and Pleasure from, because it's actually there in a little small cameo on the back. And so when the publisher said to me, what picture do you want on the cover? I was like, that one, The Divine Androgyne by Paul Rucker, because it's great. And it's been really nice, actually, because we are now friends on Facebook. So I'm a tremendous admirer of his work. So that's great. So back to inclusive Wicca. And also things like celebrating people coming out. So recently I wrote a coming out ritual, which I put up on my blog, Sermons from the Mound, which I share with Christine Hofkramer and Sarah Sadie. And there is another thing. Fertility. The idea that paganism is a fertility religion seems a bit spurious anyway. And I think it stems from James G. Fraser's The Golden Bough, and it has been fairly comprehensively debunked now that it's a fertility religion. So that means the Wicca isn't a fertility religion either. And as far as literal fertility goes, surely we do have a bit of a population problem on this planet. We don't actually need hundreds and hundreds more babies.
Right.
And the other thing is, I think fertility can be about creativity and creating things with the mind. It doesn't have to be biological fertility. And of course, the final piece in the puzzle is really same-sex initiation, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and there are a lot of people who are opposed to same-sex initiation. And when you actually start looking at the arguments that people make for that, they look an awful lot again. They look ever so similar to the arguments against same-sex marriage. And I've never seen a good argument against same-sex marriage. And every time the subject comes up in every new country where it's legalized, the frothing mad bigots trot out the same old rubbish. And you're like, hang on, we just heard that argument over there in Hawaii or wherever. And it's like, we've just had the wonderful news of the same-sex marriage in Ireland. And the frothing bigots were trotting out the same nonsense all over again. And you're like, hang on, we defeated that in Hawaii. We defeated that in the various US states where it's been legalized. It was defeated in Canada. Well, actually, Canada just kind of got it in on a technicality, bless them. We've defeated these arguments over and over and over again. And it's like they trot them out as if no one's heard them before. And you're like, but yeah, and the same arguments being trotted out against same-sex initiation. And you're going, well, sorry, but those arguments look really similar, and you're not making any sense. Because the way I see it is initiation has three, the way an initiation happens. There's an emotional connection between the initiator and the candidate. There's quite often an erotic connection, even if that erotic connection never gets physically acted on. And there's a respect as well for your teacher or whatever. So all of those, for a really successful initiation, it helps if all of those things are present. If you close the door to same-sex initiation and say, no, you can't have that, then you've immediately closed the door to any kind of erotic connection between the initiator and the candidate for those people who don't feel opposite sex attraction. And that is, to me, is a pity. It should be that people have the option to have, and it's not as if, I realise there's a very high proportion of LGBT people in the craft. So, clearly there's that, and higher than probably in the general population. But it's still, given there's only 10% of us in the general population, it's not like there's suddenly opposite sex initiation is going to be abolished overnight, Right. It's not going to happen, is it? So I just don't, no one's yet come up with a convincing reason why you can't have same-sex initiation. Sorry, I realise I'm totally preaching to the converted here.
Oh, yeah. I'll give the caveat that, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, and, we all, pretty much most of the witchcraft in the Bay Area, just kind of breaks open things, and, they do their own thing. And, we're no exception in our particular coven. Most of our stuff is pretty experimental anyway. Yeah. And, most of what, we call ourselves Alexandrian, but the most Alexandrian thing about us is really our first and second degree initiation. So, but, I think you're right too. All of that stuff, it just seems really, I hate to use this word, but it seems archaic.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to sound a little ageist or anything. But then again, I interviewed Jennifer and Gavin Bone, right, a few months ago, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we abandoned that long ago." And it's like, well, if the elders are thinking this is crap, then why are people still clinging to it? Why do you think people are still clinging to it?
I think there's a notion that, because the majority of these people that are trotting out these arguments aren't frothing mad homophobes. In the anti-same-sex marriage camp, clearly a lot of them are frothing mad homophobes, but have yet to meet apparently they exist, but I have yet to meet a Wiccan that I actually consider to be homophobic. Heterocentric? Yes. Homophobic? No. I think there's a sort of notion that tradition is fixed and unchanging and that you can't change stuff. And it's like, well, actually, anthropologists will tell you that if you look at any tradition and how it functions within a community, traditions change and evolve all the time. And that, that can be traditional practices, and it can be traditions as a whole, as in the way we refer to pagan traditions. And I think that because there's this notion that you must do the Book of Shadows and you must do the rituals in the Book of Shadows that your people handed down to you. And if you're a Whitecroft, you can only do Whitecroft. And if you're a Long Island line, you can only do Long Island line. And this is set in stone. And so there's this notion that you can't kind of mix and match and extend things. I had a fantastic conversation with my high priestess back in February. And I said, oh, I'm still doing those things you taught me about how to call quarters and stuff. She went, oh, that's fantastic. That's nice, because not a lot of people do it the way we do it. And then I said, oh, and of course I added some stuff of my own as well. And she went, great, fantastic. And so, there's a person, a highly respected elder of the craft, I might add, who is totally on board with people developing things and inventing new things, and because the things that I've included and added are in keeping of and in the spirit of what I inherited, and they go rather well together. Thank you. I think this sort of notion that some people want to do the same rituals all the time. I mean, I use elements of traditional rituals, and sometimes I just do the ritual as it stands in the Book of Shadows. But I like to, I think changing and adapting and extending things keeps them alive and organic. And doing the same stuff over and over just strikes me as sort of a bit odd, really.
And I'd argue boring after a while.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's like, when I call the quarters, I always use the same words to start and finish whatever it is I say. So I'll say, mighty ones of the direction, power of the element, and then I'll extemporize something about which relates to that element at that season and how it all fits together with the ritual we're doing. And then I finish with the same words at the end. So it's like, I call it an extemporization sandwich. You start with your fixed thing, do something innovative and different, and then finish with the, so everybody knows you finished apart from anything else. So it's having the structure there as a handrail and as a guide and as the thing that leads you into the spirit world, because you're doing the same stuff and your brain knows, yes, now we're going to the spirit world to, now we're bringing the spirit world closer to the physical world, or whatever it is we think actually happens. Right. And so your brain is then going, oh yes, that's that signal that means I go into the twilight mode. But also you want the creativity to keep it fresh as well. Exactly. Yeah.
I do the same thing. I have certain songs that I learned for the directions that I like to do. It's kind of like comfy blankety, it gets me into that space because I'm used to it. But yeah, even I mix it up every time. And sometimes I don't even do the songs, like sometimes I'll just call the quarters and it just seems, I don't know, it just seems to make sense that to allow a natural, for a religion that claims to be nature-based, just to kind of allow it to evolve naturally.
Yeah. Well, it's allowing for sort of serendipity as well. I mean, just allowing the gods and the elements and the various spirits that we're trying to talk to, allowing them to have an input and, inspire us to new things. It's like, I find it really interesting that Christians who support same-sex marriage and often talk about and also the ordination of LGBT people talk about how the Holy Spirit moves in what they're doing. And I think, we can say that the gods inspire us to these things. It's the gods want justice, and the gods want, I believe that really strongly that the gods support those people who are out there in Baltimore struggling for Black Lives Matter, and I believe that the gods support LGBT equality as well.
Right.
As the gods presumably, those gods that are interested in humans want us to flourish, and Black people being killed all over the place and LGBT people being oppressed all over the place does not contribute to human flourishing. So it just figures that they'd be on the side of those things.
Oh, I agree. And I remember, talking to the deities once about gender, the idea of gender, and they're like, yeah, and that's a human thing.
Yeah.
It's like, we don't care. That's a human thing. So if a guy, it's like, if a guy wants to call Hecate up, well, no big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, physical sex is definitely human because we have biology and the gods don't, unless they have some really strange kind of etheric biology that we just don't understand.
Right.
Who knows?
Right.
If they do, they're keeping quiet about it.
Right.
And yeah, so I mean, I like to distinguish between gender and biological sex, but even there, I mean, biological sex isn't cut and dried and sort of neatly put into two boxes. So, and the fact that we give it the level of attention that we give it is purely a social construct anyway. So yeah, it's a human thing, exactly.
Do you also think it's a responsible thing to be more inclusive and open about stuff? Because, I could think of situations where a person of one particular gender or orientation might not be comfortable with, like, say, a lesbian might not be comfortable with having a man initiator, those kind of things, depending on, the people and the circumstances, of course. Do you think it's also more responsible of the priests and priestesses to be more inclusive?
That's a really interesting one. I mean, I'd have to say it depends on why she was uncomfortable with the man. Because quite often, there are a lot of things in Wicca that people aren't comfortable with, like nudity and scourging and all kinds of stuff. Just the idea of being in a circle and calling to spirits can be quite challenging for some people. I mean, one of the things that's always really difficult is, like, what if somebody was raped, and they found it really difficult to be around other people naked? And well, then you have to think, okay, that person, that's something that's been taken away from them. That normally humans would be naturally comfortable with each other naked. And the fact that someone's been made to be uncomfortable because their personal bodily integrity has been violated, violently violated, then that's something that's been taken away from them. So so it's not a natural part of who they are, whereas your sexual orientation is so core to who you are that it's like a thing that, it's an addition. It's something that's a positive presence in who you are. So I'd want to. So my advocating of same-sex initiation is about the fact that you bring all of who you are into the circle, and that means all of who you really are, and not sort of stuff that you've acquired along the way as a result of damage. So if our hypothetical lesbian didn't want to be initiated by a man because she couldn't make an erotic or friendship connection with a man because her primary orientation was towards other women,
Mm-hmm.
then I definitely think go for it, same-sex initiation all the way.
Mm-hmm.
If it was because she was sort of against men for some other reason, or like was lumping all men together as patriarchal, as, you know, collaborators with the patriarchy or something,
Mm-hmm.
then I'd say, well, you know, actually this bloke that you're going to be working in circle with, that you are going to need to be able to trust, he's all right. And, you know, maybe you should try to make a connection there.
Mm-hmm.
So it all depends on, you know, it depends on the reasons. And it's like, I mean, the same applies to nudity and scourging and all those other things.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, to be honest, if somebody said, I want a same-sex initiation, I'd just assume that they wanted it for the best of reasons and let them get on with it, because, you know, it's not that big of a deal.
Right,
but
right.
if it was clear that somebody really didn't sort of was, I don't know, I mean, let's swing it around to something I'm slightly more comfortable talking about. Let's say we've got a homophobe in the circle.
Mm-hmm.
Well, to be honest, they're not even going to get into my circle because I basically said no homophobes in my coven. But, you know, you'd almost want to make that homophobe be initiated by a lesbian just to make them, force them to get over it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it all depends. But I don't think, you know, if somebody said, oh, I want a same-sex initiation, I'm not going to delve that deeply into their reasons. So we probably wouldn't even get to that conversation, I guess.
Right.
But also because my coven does include men, and, you know, it includes gay men, straight men, bisexual men. Okay, it's basically me and my partner at the moment, but hypothetically, you know, my coven has in the past included bisexuals, and actually we for a while we had a coven consisting entirely of bisexuals, which was quite fun.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but we have had straight people, and actually, oddly enough, we've never actually had a lesbian or a gay man, so or a trans person. But obviously, we were like, yes, come in, we're here. I guess you just have to sort of sound out each situation as it arose, wouldn't you?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, it would depend, you know, how things go would depend on, you know, the people and how they get along. And we all know about the exploding coven thing, you know. It happens.
Yes. Well, I'm proud to say that I actually managed to keep running a coven with my ex-husband for a year after we split up.
Wow.
So I'm quite proud of that. And so should you be as well.
That's really good. I mean, it's always mind-boggling. Like, you always talk about the exploding coven and you get like everybody in the room nodding like, yeah, I've been there, you know. Yeah. And it's always good.
The exploding coven thing as well, but, you know, it is possible to not have an explode. But even with the you know, with the one that did kind of fall apart in that way, we did have, you know, a lot of us are still friends, and we did have a really nice closing off ritual where everybody was happy and smiley and enjoying themselves. So
that's good, though.
Yeah, I felt it kind of ended well and in a good way, even though you know, things were difficult there for a while. It is possible to be kind of grown up about these things.
Oh yeah. I mean, anecdotally, that sounds really rare, just by anecdote alone.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really awesome, and I think, I think being open. Let me put this another way. I think inclusion can actually help that, if you know, because being open about who you are and what you are doing, I think puts a level of trust there that could maybe help keep a coven more open and communicative than being secretive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, one of the things that I found really important was having ground rules. which were agreed on consensually by the entire group. And I kind of struggled towards this through a process of trial and error, but actually the way to do it is to get everybody to brainstorm what the ground rules should be, rather than sort of writing them and then going, what does everyone think of these? But hey, I learnt that one by trial and error. And one of the things, it was really interesting because when we sort of restarted the coven, one of the prospective people said, because we always interview prospective people, said, have you got ground rules? And I thought, I like this person, because one of the things that's great about having ground rules that have been agreed on by everyone in the group is that it means that I'm not the final arbiter of authority. It's like the rules are the final, which we've all consensually agreed on. Those are the final arbiter. And I just go, all right, I'm pointing to the rule over there. So this is not about my ego. That's really important. Because, I don't think I'm authoritarian, but I think I'm just kind of, I'm fairly convinced that I'm right.
I hear you.
Yeah. So, I kind of have to check that in, rein that in a bit, and that's one good way to do that. And I also have a thing where, in case I turn into one of those kind of people with a big entourage of people saying, "Oh, Yvonne, you're so wonderful," I've got a few people who I've said, right, if I turn into one of those people, please come and give me a kick up the arse.
It's always useful to have, though. It really is.
I mean, I don't think I'm going to need them, but it's a good reality check. It's kind
absolutely.
of important.
Well, it's self-care, right? I mean, when you're doing this work, and especially when you're presenting ideas that aren't necessarily popular with some people, you need to have that kind of grounding in order to really kind of function through that, because then you either get a big head, or you believe that you're doing something wrong because all these people are like, rah, and I think that transcends tradition too. Cause, I've gotten, I don't get a lot of flack for my podcast because it's very progressive and, very much about radical inclusion and all that stuff. But, I know it could possibly happen someday, depending on how big I get. But I also don't want to get a big head about the podcast either, And thankfully, my wife and my coven are really great about, and my church too. There are people that are going to be like, Gina, really?
That's good. Yeah. No, it's kind of important, and but it's also nice to have those people who are going, it's okay, you're not mad. That's really important too.
Right.
Because, I did get a few people just sort of being quite anti what I was saying. And I kind of thought, oh dear, I seem to have stuck my head rather a long way above the parapet here. There seemed to be a lot of people taking pot shots at me. So it got a bit scary for a while there. But then a lot of other people came up, sort of came and stood beside me. And in fact, right now, some friends of mine are holding a pagan pub moot where they are discussing the topic of inclusivity. So kind of wish I could be a fly on the wall there, because that's awesome.
That's cool.
It is cool.
Do you think this is the future? I mean, just kind of catching up with the 21st century,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so encouraging that same-sex marriage is becoming a thing all over the place. I mean, particularly Ireland, because it's kind of renowned for being a bit conservative.
I know.
And I was just so excited about that, especially as I have friends in Ireland, all of whom were voting yes with great enthusiasm and going around canvassing for the yes vote and everything. And it's just, actually, it's been huge, because for them, being gay was only made legal in 1993. So that's within living memory, Right. I mean, here in the UK, the it was made legal the year before I was born.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of been legal for my whole life. So, whereas, in Ireland, I was, hang on, 93. I was so it was made legal in my early 20s in Ireland. That's crazy,
Mm-hmm.
And now, there's still work to do there, but it's a huge step. And now we have to go and sort it out in all those countries where where the death penalty is still a thing. But is it the future? Absolutely. I believe it was Martin Luther King who said, "The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice." And this is clearly a social justice thing, isn't it? And
Mm-hmm.
it's the idea of celebrating love and equality for everyone. Definitely the future. And I'm just kind of baffled as to why, when Wicca is so inclusive it's welcoming to LGBT people and all the rest of it, and other sexual minorities, and yet, we can't see. There seems to be some people who can't take that final step towards, okay, we've welcomed people in, but now we're going to bang on about heterosexual stuff all the time, huh?
Right.
Right. Like I say, I enjoy the odd spot of heterosexual sex as much as the next bisexual, but it's possible to talk about and celebrate sex in an inclusive way, and that's inclusive to heterosexuals and same-sex lovers.
Mm-hmm. I was also thinking, while we were talking about, it being the evolution of paganism specifically, I think there's kind of, given the vote in Ireland, especially, I think there's an evolution going on of religion in general, because people are really kind of tired of basically religions being crap to people.
Yeah, also, if you go back to the roots of paganism, the roots of paganism were LGBT inclusive. That's why we have all these, queer shamans and queer deities and wonderful queer practices and everything. Ancient paganism wasn't homophobic. That, people might have done their same-sex love a bit differently back then, but, we know there were lesbians, we know there were gay men, or men loving men and women loving women, however we want to describe them. And whilst their gay identity might have been constructed differently, they were definitely loving people with the same bits as them,
Right.
And celebrating that. So, we know that that this sort of focus on heterosexual sex was introduced by, presumably by Christianity, or by patriarchy or something.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to lay all the blame at the door of Christianity, but because there was a general turn towards the rejection of bodily pleasures,
right.
Which started in late pagan antiquity. So can't lay it all at the door of Christians.
Yeah. I tend to lay it at the foot of Augustine, but that's because I went to seminary.
Yeah, well, he was a bit of a useless git, let's face it.
Right.
But yes, I think, it was the turn against sexuality and the body, and the turn towards misogyny, and it's quite a complex historical phenomenon, so it's really hard to sort of pin it to any one thing. But clearly the spread of Christianity helped to cement it in popular consciousness, so to speak. One of a brilliant article I saw once in History Today said that the church was always preaching against fornication, but nobody knew what it meant, so they were all happily having gay sex in haystacks and everything without knowing that they were doing anything, supposedly wrong. So I take quite a lot of comfort from that.
Yeah. Well, it's, it's kind of an accessibility thing. If you're poor and you don't have accessibility to learning, you're not going to know what it is. So whatever.
Right. And if all the sermons were in Latin, then who's going to know what they were on about anyway?
Yeah, right.
It's like, we're going to tell you what to do, but we're going to tell you it in a language you don't speak.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It does not compute. Yeah.
Speaking of that, I think the internet really has pushed a lot of this evolution pretty far. And I've talked about this with a lot of other people too, where I think that, we're in another age of information explosion, like, because, around 2000 years ago, you've had the Silk Road and you've had a mixing of culture and ideas and stuff. And I think with the advent of the internet, I think we're having the same thing. So it just seems like it's pretty clear to me, and, and I could be wrong, but, it seems clear to me that with all these ideas coming into play, people are like, hey, wait a minute, we could do things differently. And, the people that like the more traditional ways of doing things are kind of like kicking and screaming and fighting it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, what I like to do is emphasize that for the benefit of, I like tradition. It's just, I like real tradition, and real traditions are actually where LGBT people were included. I like the idea of polarity. I just think it extends beyond a man and a woman. I like the idea of fertility. I just think it extends to creativity and doesn't have to be about biological, so it's about expanding those traditional existing concepts, and reclaiming the ancient pagan tradition of being inclusive. And also, I think that, we do traditions, if we do them, because they're life enhancing and they're good. If they're not life enhancing and they don't actually benefit everyone, then don't do them. It's as simple as that. Or adapt them. It's like there are some traditions that are actively harmful, like foot binding in China. And actually, I would argue wearing high-heeled shoes is almost bad.
I think so.
Yeah, they hurt. And they upset your internal organs and stuff. Female circumcision, that's a really bad tradition that, should be stopped because it's harmful. So just saying we do this thing because it's traditional is not a sufficient reason for doing a thing. Because quite often, you have to ask the question, well, who is it benefiting? Who is it harming? The Jewish Passover Seder is a completely beautiful tradition where people sit around a table and the story of the liberation of a people is passed on to the next generation, accompanied by some very nice food and quite a lot of singing. Beautiful tradition, beneficial, not harmful. Great, bring it on. On the other hand, the like I say, actively harmful traditions like foot binding and female circumcision, very bad. Can't see any reason whatsoever to continue with those, whatever the justification for them might have been. And in between that, we have things like Morris dancing, which I actively dislike. But, a lot of people derive lots of joy and happiness from Morris dancing. And, I'm deeply delighted for them. And as long as they don't force me to participate in Morris dancing, they're clearly not doing me any harm. And, I think I'd love to like Morris dancing. It's just don't.
Okay.
So, long live Morris dancing. That's great. Force me to listen to accordion music, which is basically what the problem is. There's a whole range of traditions, some of which are neutral and some of which are good. And, so it's just a case of, if somebody's enjoying this tradition and it's not harming anyone else, great. It provides a social continuity and a connection for people, and it creates community. That's all great. But if a tradition actively excludes people or actively harms people, then it needs to be changed or adapted. Yeah, and the idea that tradition is fixed and not fluid and evolving, and that we must do tradition just because it's tradition, seems like that's the thing that's really retrogressive in my mind. Right.
I think also there's the aspect of free will. And, as you're talking, you don't particularly care for Morris dancing. Well, and you're saying, as long as it's not forced down your throat. And I think that is another aspect to consider about inclusivity, is that, if as my wife likes to say, are you what you say you are on the tin, right? If you're claiming to be inclusive and yet you have rituals that are exclusive, you insist that because of tradition, then people have to do X, Y, and Z in your rituals, and there's no space for change. How is that helping with free will? How is that really helping people and not harming people? And
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The way I work is that actually I'm a bit lazy, so I like to encourage my trainees and initiates to write their own rituals as early as possible. And I also get them to build in opportunities for extemporization because that's good as well.
Right.
So actually, a prerequisite for your first degree initiation is that you will have written and facilitated a ritual. So that's even before you get your first degree. And then after your first degree, having written and facilitated at least one ritual is one of the prerequisites for second degree. This means that people get a ritual that they are 100% happy with because they wrote it, or at least potentially 100%. One ever 100% happy with something that one has written? But still, they can include all the things that they like to do in their ritual, and then next time it's somebody else's turn to include all the things that they like. And because we're a collaborative and cooperative species, we tend to think, oh, I'll put that in because person X will like that. And so we create rituals that we know each other will enjoy, as it's like a gift to the coven. So that creativity and the joy of sharing is a really important thing. And that's, so I think if you kind of say we're doing it like this because it's the tradition and that is set in stone, then that it just isn't inclusive, because you're bound to be you're excluding creative people, so, let alone LGBT people. So it's not going to work very well, I don't think.
What do you think is the future of Wicca itself, and maybe inclusive Wicca, going forward?
I think that what will happen is what happened with progressive Wicca. And progressive Wicca is something that no one's heard of now. And I think that is entirely as its movers and shakers would have wanted it. They're still around as it happens, but I think it's pretty much what they wanted. So in the late 90s, no, when was it? Yeah, sort of mid to late 90s, a group of people put together the idea of progressive Wicca, which was basically a more egalitarian and more creative form of Wicca. But they deliberately said, we're not doing a new movement. This is not a new tradition. This is not a new grouping. It's a tendency within the existing groupings of Gardnerian and Alexandrian. And I was never sort of officially, formally part of that, but I picked up a lot of their ideas and ran with them because I thought they were good ideas. And now pretty much everybody in the British craft is doing those things because it just became part of the norm. And that is one of the reasons why I wanted to say, no, I'm not creating, we, other inclusive Wiccans, of whom there are many out there,
right.
Whether they identify as that or not. We're not creating a new movement. We're not creating, we're not saying, right, we are seceding from our existing Wiccan tradition and going off and founding something else. No, we're doing our existing tradition in an inclusive way. And I think that people will just get to the point where they kind of go, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. One of the things I did with the book was to write about how to do kind of a more egalitarian Wicca in general. So it's inclusive, it's sort of inclusive from the ground up. So it doesn't feel like a bolt on. It's kind of, okay, we do rituals in a consultative way and we share responsibility and we we share responsibility for creating the guidelines of how we're going to be together as a group. And, we show up on time because some people have to go home and get their sleep. And, it's kind of caring for each other as a group and as a community is the whole ethos. And then, inclusivity sort of naturally flows from that. So I think that the future will be that people will just naturally kind of wonder what all the fuss was about,
Right.
And that is as it should be, and so I definitely don't think we should be founding a new movement or anything. We're just basically saying, right, okay, we're doing our existing tradition in a more inclusive way.
And maybe, making it better, making it more accessible, making it.
Absolutely. Well, I think if it doesn't become more inclusive and accessible, it's going to die. And, it won't be because somebody took it out to the crossroads and put a stake through its heart. It will be because it just kind of, people walked. People will just go. It's like Christianity. Christianity is in decline. Rather, conservative Christianity is in decline because there are so many people going, no, don't agree with all this anti-gay stuff, so I'm off. And progressive Christianity, I hope, is on the up. I mean, I was at a dinner the other day with about the rights of a group of dissidents in Iran who are being persecuted by the regime there, and they sitting opposite me at the table were an evangelical Christian couple, and we got chatting, and they said, "Oh yeah, we're LGBT inclusive," because they felt that it was just the right thing to do. And I thought, come on, evangelical Christians are on board now, and the woman said, that things had changed massively in the evangelical movement over the last few decades. And so that was very exciting to see. And I mean, you still get homophobic nonsense in that kind of group, but it was really encouraging to see. And the fact that, I said, yes, I'm a pagan, and she didn't fall off her perch, so that was all great. Actually, my next door neighbours are evangelical Christians, and they're really nice people, and they were interested and asked intelligent questions. So I think it's just the way of the world that people are starting to communicate more and be more open. I just wish everyone would stop voting in conservative governments.
Tell me about it. I mean, US, right? Ooh,
well, yeah. I mean, we've just got another 5 years of the bastards.
Condolences. So, my condolences. My wife was following that quite closely, obviously, and
oh yeah, of course, yeah.
And there's a bit of consoling needing to happen.
Absolutely, yeah. We do need consoling. It is worrying.
Yeah, my thought was, please just don't become like us. That's bad, really.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, we need to keep our National Health Service and our anti-gun laws and our access to abortion and and all those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, it all comes down to that inclusivity, honestly, because that kind of stuff is part of, welcoming people in and being welcoming to people in all of who they are.
Absolutely. Yes. And the right to bodily autonomy and life and things like that.
Well, I'm afraid we're running low on time. So
we are.
Yeah. So, first of all, if people wanted to get in touch with you to ask you questions, and where can people get your book?
Right, you can get my book on Amazon. It is available on Kindle. You could go to Avalonia Books, which is the publisher, and if people want to get in touch, my blog is on Patheos called Sermons from the Mound. I'm currently writing a series called Paganism for Beginners, because I realised that there's an awful lot of people who looking at paganism and going, oh, yeah, I'm really interested, but where do I start? And all the stuff is at a kind of 201, all the blog posts and things are all at a 201 level. Mm-hmm. And that's great because we need more 201 stuff, but also I figured we actually need a clear introduction at a 101 level as well. Mm-hmm. That isn't all about what colour your candles should be and that kind of stuff.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I'm writing at the moment. So yes, people can get in touch via the blog, and I always try to reply to comments and stuff. So yeah. Right. Oh, and I have a Facebook page about my books as well.
Okay. We'll include all that on the show notes, and make sure that people have all that. And thank you very much for being on the show.
You're very welcome. It was really nice talking to you.
You too. I'd like to thank Yvonne for joining us on this episode. As always, if you have questions, comments, or would like to read the show notes, you can go to thisweekinheresy.com. You can also subscribe to the show via iTunes or the Stitcher app and follow us on Twitter at TWIH Podcast. And if you can, please consider supporting this podcast through patreon.com. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.